Remember that Polk had fired Zachary Taylor, fearing that he would run against him, and he had hurried up to sign the treaty to end the war, probably to America's detriment, because he thought that would help him win re-election. So, ironically, in the election of 1848, Polk is not going to win re-election. So, let's talk about that. Many people came to see Polk as just a pawn of the slave owners, or just somebody trying to help the South extend slavery into the Southwest. Remember, the Missouri Compromise line was very clear. There can be slavery below this line, and most of the land that we took was below that line. So this threatened to dramatically increase the number of slave states. In August of 1846, Polk had asked for $2 million to try to end the war, but a Democrat from Pennsylvania named Wilmot attached a rider prohibiting slavery in the land won in the war. This actually passed in the House, but it died in the Senate. And it created intense paranoia in the South, who saw this as the beginning of the North's attempt to kill slavery for good. They would claim it violated the Fourth Amendment, which said that the government can't take your property without a warrant or probable cause. They said slaves are property. You can't take our property. Polk supports extending the Missouri Compromise line into the new territory, and others began to call for popular sovereignty, or squatter sovereignty as called originally, which is the people who live there can vote whether or not they're going to be slave or free. But in 1848, the election ends talk of slavery as both parties simply avoid the issue. As we're running, this is the issue in the country. It's the most important issue in the country, and no politicians will talk about it in the election of 1848. Ironically, Polk, who had done so much to try to make sure he got reelected, will get incredibly ill and will be too sick to run. In fact, he'll have the shortest retirement of any president, dying just a few months after he leaves office. And so his dreams of reelection not only don't come true, he dies almost right away. Lewis Cass of Michigan is nominated by the Democrats. He's dull, uninspiring, a long-time party regular. And who do the Whigs nominate? Well, they nominate Zachary Taylor, which is, of course, exactly what Polk had feared. They both support slavery. Taylor's from Louisiana, after all. He is a slave owner. And so Northerners who don't support slavery will run a third-party candidate. The Free Soil Party will nominate Martin Van Buren. Zachary Taylor barely wins in this split election. Van Buren gets 10%, over 10% of the vote. And this splitting of the vote actually gives Taylor the victory. Taylor indicates, this indicates the inability of the current party system to address the real-world issues facing the country, slavery. Now, in January of 1848, nobody knows it, but gold is found at Sutter's Mill, which is near San Francisco, California. The world won't find out until 1849, but when word gets out, the whole world freaks out. There is just gold sitting there in the ground and the rivers and the hillsides. And many, many, many people will go to California with all haste. Most people who go there will plan their move and they'll pack up and move there. But some people, particularly young men, will simply drop what they're doing and walk to California. I mean, this is not an exaggeration. Thousands and thousands of Americans will be working on a field. Somebody will tell them, hey, did you hear they found gold in California? They'll drop, their plow and turn around and just walk to California, because it was a race. It was a gold rush. The first people who get there were going to get the easiest gold to get. And so people went there as quickly as they could. 95% of the people who went in the gold rush were white males. And as we've seen before, if there aren't women and children around, you end up with a pretty dangerous, crazy society. Imagine the type of person who will drop everything they're doing and run 2,000 or 3,000 miles to try to find gold laying on the ground. Well, that's probably not a real stable person. And imagine a society filled with these people who are at times having lots of money to spend and at times having no money to spend and being desperate. And so you create this kind of crazy, uncontrolled, wild society. It also creates a labor crisis in California. Nobody wants to do any work because they have a better chance of making money just wandering around the hills looking for gold. Stories get back to China, and the Chinese come in significant numbers because the story in China says California is basically a giant mountain of gold and you can just walk up to it, fill up your pockets, and go back home and be rich the rest of your life. Of course, that's not true. By the time most Chinese get here, the areas that have gold are already controlled by whites, and the Chinese become basically an indentured labor system in California. They're horribly mistreated and worked brutally hard. California begins passing laws to essentially enslave Native Americans. Loitering becomes a crime, and being an orphan becomes a crime. And once you get arrested, and once you're in jail, you can be hired out as labor to the gold mines. Only a tiny percentage of people found gold, as you can imagine. Some went home, but most stayed. And so, for example, San Francisco, California, you see it there in 1848, and then 3 years later in 1851. That's the same perspective. In 1849, there were fewer than 1,000 people in San Francisco. By 1856, that's 7 years later, there's more than 50,000. And you have to understand, imagine building all that housing, the roads, the schools, the businesses you need for that. This is a town that just pops up out of nowhere to become a major American city. The gold rush, by the way, makes California the most diverse state, as blacks, whites, Mexicans, Chinese, South Americans, and Europeans all come looking for the gold. Fights over ethnicity and this massive influx of wealth creates an extremely unstable cultural and political environment in California.